there's a lot more people that have some type of digestive issue than probably know.
Is you do go number 2, right? Most people will poop, hopefully.
Welcome back to Beyond the Pump, where we break down the business of fitness and nutrition. And today we're going to talk all things digestion and poop. Andrew has informed me, which I'm going to jump into this thing first. You'll notice I have a slightly different setup going on here. We've actually partnered up with somebody that's helping us with our podcast. I was like, hey, I need you to move your room around, and that's been an adventure. I'm not done yet. This is not what you'll see on the next episode, but I needed to throw it together today so we could record. But trying to move a bunch of things around when you're in your flow state and just like the disruption to the normal day to day has been quite magnificent. And I bring this up because digestion is one of those things where I think on the internet, on social media, everybody has all of these things going on out there of like all of this stuff is wrong. And this one little thing is massively disrupting your digestion. Sometimes it's probably not wrong, but I think other times it's just so convoluted and confusing, and even more so like, how do I even know what's going on, or should I even go down this road? I know through being in this world, and Andrew, you can speak to it better than I can, getting digestion-based testing done isn't necessarily, call it the most enjoyable process, or call it the least expensive process. So, I bring up the office of everything's disrupted. It's crazy. It's chaos. And it's like, what do I do first? But digestion, I think out there, gut health and root cause approach and SIBO and all of these things, not that they're fake, not that they're real. I frankly don't know nor truly care. But there's a couple of things that really come to play here of like, where do you start and where should you maybe, with your clients, where should you start with them before you even suggest some testing that starts to cost a lot of money, takes time, and again, is, call it, not enjoyable to solve. So, Andrew.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the word root cause and that phrase is getting some prominence in the health industry in general. And I think that it's really important to dispel what that's not, which is basically relegating or saying that someone's negative health status and whatever symptoms they're experiencing is reduced to a single thing. It's not like you can say, yeah, sure, your poor sleep, your poor water intake, your lack of exercise and everything, but your diabetes is based upon overeating, high glycemic index or glycemic load foods. And it just, I think that people were really looking for clarity, and there's something around diagnosing things, which is just noticing and naming them, that really helps people feel like that can have a potentially better handle and more control over the situation. So I think that digestion, especially as we talk about it in our nutritional consultation certification course, like we really do look at it from the perspective of you have to know how things work in order to understand how they're broken. And so the theme of the season, for the most part, is generally around nutrition and helping people understand some of the basic tools that we think and know based upon our own research and clinical experience, as well as coaching experience, like what things actually make a big difference from, generally speaking, an exercise physiology perspective. But all that to say, I'm kind of curious, Steve, as we talk about gut health, as we talk about digestion, I know that you've read a lot of the white papers on that topic, but how would you define those things as we start to look at, again, how they work and generally what coaches can do to understand some basic strategies on how to help it along?
Your body's ability to extract nutrition out of the food you eat and then rid what you're not leveraging and using out the other end in a most efficient manner, right? And I think it said a little more detailed, my interpretation of all of the white papers, which of that I've read, would be your ability to take, nutrition, calories, macros, etc., out of the food you eat, and your ability to go to the bathroom on a regular, healthy basis.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like if we really take the complex science down, which I mean, there's a difference between basic science, which is the research, jargon heavy stuff that a lot of people really don't know how to apply, and what you'll find in a lot of nutrition courses and nutrition textbooks, frankly. But then we're more of a secondary messenger type, where we take the stuff that's kind of complicated and we just really do our best to break it down and make it digestible.
Pun intended.
He's had too much coffee. Yes, I have. And so when we think about the nature of what digestion is as it relates to kind of maybe a quasi-scientific thing, it's just basically the mechanical breakdown and the chemical breakdown of foods so that your body can absorb and make use of it. Exactly what Steve said. Generally speaking, it happens in 3 phases, and you can argue it happens even more so kind of in 4, but it kind of goes from a top-down process. Just to give you a quick run through, we have what happens in the head, what happens in the stomach, and what happens in the intestines. And everything, the intestines are affected by the upstream stuff, which is in the stomach. The stomach is affected by the upstream stuff, which is in the brain. And the brain, oddly enough, is then influenced by the stuff that's circulating, or basically like your appetite, regulating hormones, stuff like that. So it's a pretty well-oiled machine when you think about how your body is intended to keep you alive. And that means you need to consume stuff that you're burning through on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, nothing too crazy outside of that top-down approach. I mean, so Steve, when you're thinking about digestion, out of curiosity, we hear gut health and we hear like SIBO, and you mentioned those specifically. And obviously you've consulted with some organizations that specialize in that. Is there anything that you would suggest that would be a helpful paradigm for people to consider as it relates to making good use of their digestion, or how to understand when it's, I guess the real question I'm trying to ask is, how do you know when your digestion might be a little messed up?
Yeah, and let me throw some thoughts in here real quick. And again,
Yeah.
having been able to consult for a couple of companies that go on this functional gut health approach, I think what they do is pretty good. But the thing that I don't love is every single client that walks in the door that gets a consultation or whatever must
Yeah.
go buy a boatload of testing.
Yes.
And while I agree you should have the testing before you do certain protocols and take certain things, I question, does every single person need all of that testing? And it's to the tune of a good, I mean, depending upon what's going on, let's say plus or minus like $1,000 or more sometimes. And that's like literal hard cost. That's not even the business making some money in between. So it's one of those components where when I go down this road, there's a lot of client loss in those businesses because of the expense associated to running these things. And some people probably needed it and didn't get the help. And some people probably didn't need it and spent money that they probably didn't necessarily need. So there's that component. Now, the other side of why is this important? I think about me and, Andrew, obviously as my coach for, I don't know, 4 years, whatever. It's one of those things where 3 years, when I look at it and I go, okay, when did I care about gut health? And I didn't care about it in the beginning. The first time I cared was, hey, Andrew, it's really uncomfortable to eat all of this food to bulk. And it doesn't make me feel well. So like, what do we got going on? And have some of this apple cider vinegar. And like, oh, Andrew, I did this thing in my stomach and it's really bubbly. Oh, go drink this real quick. And does it get warm or does it not get warm? And like, that can tell us some information. So for me, it was like, okay, great. There's these simple home tests and things that I can do. Hey, Steve, what does your, bowel movement look like? Is it regular? Is it this? That it was one of those like, oh, okay, here's probably the reason why that's happening. Go do this thing, and this thing, which are all $3 a day extra to handle, and I can do it on my own, and I didn't need $1,000 worth of tests. Same token, if on the other side it was, hey, Steve, here's likely what's going on through these basic things, you're going to need $1,000 in tests. Yeah, absolutely, all day long, because I want to solve this problem. So as a coach, when you're thinking about this, people need to have a legitimate reason as to why, I believe. Now, some people don't care. They're there to do it, and your program is your program. And if that's a part of your program, cool, find those right people. But I just want to throw that out there from a business perspective, a little bit from a client perspective as well, seeing both sides. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of monetization opportunities in that. And that's where I think, asking for your perspective on that, it's really important that people do the right thing for the client at the right time. Now, the question of what is the right thing, there's a certain series of screenings that you can do that escalate in cost, unless you're working with a very affluent community or demographic that, if money is no issue, then you can easily go ahead and just be like, hey, here's the battery of tests we're going to do. But for the majority of people that we will come into contact with, they will have some financial constraints. They'll have to be a little more money conscious. And so when you think about, I was taking a course, and I'll just go ahead and put it out there. I was taking the functional diagnostic nutrition course, which was a lot of advanced lab testing. And in hindsight, it was really inappropriate for me to take at the time I took it. I would generally suggest, like, if you are going to go down the diagnostic route, go look at some blood chem stuff, understand how the body works a little bit more, and then go into some of the advanced stool testing, pathogen testing, like all that other stuff. But when I'm saying that, to give you a frame of reference of how much some of this stuff costs, you can easily spend $5,000 with just an initial battery of tests and supplementation to fix the things that you're probably going to find, because most people probably have some kind of parasitic issue and some kind of, chronic inflammation. Like, those things are pretty common course these days. And so when you think about how to escalate and improve people's digestion, again, you need to understand that there are probably some basic things to look for and screen for. And when you think about going from different levels, like, obviously, if you're super stressed or someone's super stressed, that's going to change your perception of hunger. It's going to change things in the cephalic phase of digestion, which actually might alter your hunger cues. Your sleep rhythm will alter your hunger cues, right? Your traditional feeding frequency, like your circadian rhythm, all those things will change your cephalic phase of digestion. And that's why I think it's important that coaches don't just look at what time of day, like what are the macros. There's also how you're consuming food, which the first time I ever heard this, I want to credit like James Fitzgerald over at OPEX Fitness. Phenomenal. Like, I was a genius when it came to all things fitness, and he did a good job integrating these other elements into it. But he brought up this term called food hygiene, which isn't even necessarily what you're consuming, but the mindful nature of which you are consuming it. And it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years ago, probably close to a decade after I heard it, that it clicked of the way that you consume food is probably most affecting both your cephalic, or your first phase of digestion, as well as your second phase and your gastric phase of digestion, where your stomach is now having to increase how much stomach acid circulating to chemically break down that food that you're consuming. So, all that to say, to make this a little more tactical and a little less like esoteric, here are the things that you want to look for as it relates to stomach and or small intestine symptoms that frankly might be common, but they're not normal, right? You might see them, you might feel them regularly. However, an increased prevalence of that without any kind of relief over time might lead to some serious health complications. And they're an indication that you want to probably get something checked out. Or maybe improve your food choices, improve how you're dealing with stress. There's a lot of different things that you can do that are beyond the scope of this podcast episode, but make sure that I think there's a previous sleep episode that you need to go check out. That's probably the biggest thing that you can do to affect positively all your digestion stuff. But you're looking at bloating after meals. You're looking at basically, if you feel that distension, or that, depending on where you feel it, might indicate what's going on. If you feel a little bit higher, could be some stomach, small intestine stuff. If you feel a little bit lower, it could be something large intestinal. And that's where knowing where that is, what it feels like, might then change what modality or what recommendation you make for people. And that's why it's important to ask questions and clarify things that your clients are feeling. Because if they're like, oh, I just feel a little bloated, and you're like, well, what does that feel like? And they tell you it feels like there's an alien that's clawing on their guts and they're trying to get out. You're like, oh, that might be a problem. Or if they're like, oh, I just kind of feel a little gassy and I just, fart a little bit and I feel fine after, you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, probably lower in, large intestine, maybe some weird transient stuff, not a big deal. We won't change anything. But bloating's a big one. Heartburn, or really just like that GERD, that esophageal reflux stuff, that kind of like that burp up, that could also be something where, a lot of people will specifically in the medical field traditionally recommend antacids. And there's a really big problem right now in terms of habitual use of that. We know that in the research, what tends to be the standing recommendation as of 2 or 3 years ago when I looked at last, there is a time cap on how long you should take it. And generally speaking, it's not supposed to be more than 3 months. And if you're taking it more than 3 months, you actually start to have some structural changes inside of how your stomach then creates more stomach acid, which oddly enough can kind of exacerbate or really just make you feel that symptom even more. Um, even though the medication you're taking or the antacid is supposed to do the opposite. So something to keep in mind. Excessive belching or burping, and then basically like really just being sensitive to a lot of foods, whether that means you got to run to the bathroom, that means, maybe your skin starts to get a little funky. There's like over 80 different signs and symptoms of food sensitivity: headache, running nose, just like some people get not headaches, but some people get migraines, which we still really don't know the etiology of migraines. So all that to say is like those are some small intestine things that we've noticed would indicate something might be off. And then your large intestine stuff, if you go down a little bit further, tends to be like just really foul smelling gas, some lower abdominal bloating, constipation, or diarrhea. And which one shows up would then change what kind of fiber take, whether you need more fluid, less fluid, stuff like that. And generally speaking, like if people are taking a lot of antibiotics, they're probably going to have a nuke large intestine that you're going to want to probably figure out what kind of probiotics versus blindly throwing them at that person. So those are probably things you want to pay attention to determine if something's off. So Steve, anything else to contribute in terms of the business perspective of ideas, how to monetize that or how coaches can leverage that?
Yeah, I think just understanding these things, first of all, and being willing to ask these questions that are sometimes potentially uncomfortable for the right
Mm-hmm.
clients will
Yeah.
show that you care and is going to, out of the gates, likely increase things like retention and keeping them with you for a longer period of time. It
Mm-hmm.
is from a actual monetization standpoint for more money today with the testing, with some of those components. And again, like the caveat here is make sure people are getting tests that they need based upon what you know and what is within your scope of ability to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like I'll throw that in there. But there's a lot of companies out there where you can go and you can partner with them on tests. You can have people read certain things for you, make suggestions, recommendations. And then on the other
Mm-hmm.
side of that, there's usually a protocol that's going to be involved that likely involves them purchasing some type of product, supplement, something else,
Yeah.
which again, usually
Yeah.
from a affiliate standpoint, partnership standpoint, whatever, you can go ahead and generate some revenue. So that
Mm-hmm.
said, like just above all else, it needs to be something that's beneficial for the client and you've deemed it necessary through whatever decision tree that you've been given by these companies or whatever education you have. Don't just try to
Mm-hmm.
give people things for the sake of getting some money, because I promise you the extra 15, 20, 25% for 1 or 2 months before they leave because they're frustrated isn't worth the
Yeah.
extra money.
Yeah, it'll bite you in the butt. And when people see that you recommend things that might not necessarily be the best or most impactful from an outcome perspective, they'll trust you less. And so this is where you want to be very, very careful, especially in complex or more complex cases that might be some chronic kind of health condition. And if you suspect that, like again, the disclaimer here is that you probably should go and partner with someone like a gastroenterologist, preferably a professional medical provider would be a great start for that. Now, I will say that when you do the testing, and to give you a frame of reference, I realize I ADHD'd over this, but it costs me $440 for a GI map test, which is like a stool test. You kind of poop on a pad, scrape it, send it off, and they kind of look at what's in there and tell you what's probably circulating in your guts. And so that's literally me paying the lab for the test. That's not a markup. I don't make any money on that. And so you'll find a lot of places that will charge another 10 to 20% if they just mostly do lab testing. So you're looking at well over $500. And that's not to include, probably the 5 to 7 supplements on the back end of that are probably going to range from anywhere from $20 to $80 a piece. So let's just call it 60. You're looking at another 360. So 800, like about $900 to just do a single test and potentially fix some things. And the thing that people don't talk about though is that there's also going to have to be some lifestyle interventions. You're going to have to curtail some things that might be causing some some extra inflammation in your gut. Give it some time to heal a little bit. You're probably going to need to manage your stress. You're probably going to need to manage your sleep. You're going to definitely need to increase your water if you're not drinking enough. And that's where I think a lot of coaches can really shine, is that even before you recommend that people invest a lot of money, sometimes when we just give people the right environment and health behaviors to that they're going to have to do anyway, despite the test, that usually is my approach of like, all right, well, you got some funky stuff. I suspect this, and this is going on. Why don't we do a, 30 to 60 day kind of healthy behavior reset, and let's see what happens. And if worse comes to worse, you'll have that stuff dialed in before you even take the test, and it'll make your intervention after significantly more impactful. And you won't have to take that stuff probably nearly as long. So it's usually a win-win. And it's in my experience, and I can't say this is in the research, but it's in my experience that when people do that, I would say over 3/4 of the people, a lot of their signs and symptoms kind of just disappear. So, save them $1,000. Now, granted, they got to pay me for my time and expertise. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but now at least they know that those are pretty big levers that they can impact, on their own without having necessarily medical oversight. But the other thing that we wanted to talk about briefly in terms of diagnostics and kind of like self-assessments, we talked about some of the signs and symptoms, small intestine, large intestine things. And we also look at, well, that's kind of what's going on underneath the hood. You really can't see that. Lab testing can help you understand that a little bit. But one thing you do actually do a lot of is you do go number 2, right? Most people will poop, hopefully. Although I did have one person I did a consultation with, and she said that she only pooped once a month. Pretty crazy to me. Like, not exactly the healthiest individual, would eat candy, working 3 jobs as a software developer, trying to put like 5 kids through college at the same time. I mean, like a hard worker. And so by the time she came and sat across from me during the consultation, it had been pretty significant in terms of her health deterioration that we ended up referring her out because she definitely needed some supervision medically. But there's something called the Bristol Stool Chart, and it's a poop chart. It's kind of scored on a 0 to 7, with a 4 kind of being what we would want to see. And if you haven't seen one yet, you can easily just, pause the episode for a second and go Google it. It's really important. But you'll look at basically, and I don't want to really be crass and go into too much detail, but depending on what your stool looks like can indicate what might be happening during the digestive process. And so if you see like type 1, which is more like, rabbit, they're kind of like pellety, not super stuck together, but you'll find that maybe you probably just need to drink a little bit more water to help move that stuff through your GI tract. And you probably need to have some more fiber to more or less, add some bulk, or excuse me, add some softening to that. And that's traditionally probably going to be more of your soluble fibers, which are stool softeners. You think about like Metamucil, stuff like that. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you find that it's just like straight up diarrhea. It's just like watery. There's no there's terrible consistency. And so that might mean that you need to potentially add some bulk to it. And that might mean you want to consume some more insoluble fiber. And that's where you start to use those signs and symptoms in the feedback loop to make better informed choices based upon what your body is screaming at you pretty often. So I would say that those are probably the big digestive things you should pay attention to: signs and symptoms, Bristol Stool Chart. And if you're able to kind of calibrate or recalibrate recommendations based on that, I think you'll be pretty successful from a food consumption perspective, not necessarily a macros or a micros perspective, though. So that's all I have to say about digestion.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot more people that have some type of digestive issue than probably know out there.
Yeah.
But of those people, there's a lot of them that with some likely simple, basic testing, questioning, and at-home things to do can get rid of a majority of their experience of what's going on, if not kind of alleviate all the things. And that's a generalized blanket statement. So obviously there's going to be nuances to that, but understanding it, every coach, you should be asking some basic questions. How do you feel after you eat? How's this? How's that? Get some of those things. I would ask the general ones, but I would also ask, do you ever get any bloating? Does your bloating ever bother you in this area? Do you ever have any, acid reflux and digestion type things, stuff like that? Like, if you eat too close to bed, how does that make you feel? If you, just asking general questions throughout your onboarding process is going to be helpful for you to start to understand where you need to kind of poke and prod when it comes to these things.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's, again, one of the larger value points of being a coach and why someone should hire you is that effectively You're there to help bring awareness to the appropriate things without creating overwhelm. You make someone aware of everything at the same time. I mean, you want to see someone panic, give them their entire lab results and show them a whole bunch of stuff that's in the red. Like, there's shit they're probably, yeah. I mean, it's,
Pun
that's the theme of
intended.
the day. But yeah, like, so you need to, and this is where one of the biggest mistakes I see with coaches, especially new coaches that are trying to understand and track biofeedback. Like in the last course I wrote over at, a different company, I made a lot of mistakes during that course because I didn't add a lot of the context and a lot of although we were an application-based company, we really didn't necessarily talk about how to apply a lot of these things. We just talked more about like, here's the science, here's what a coaching scenario looks like, not necessarily including the science. And so in our most recent updates, like we understand that we're doing significantly better job bridging the two in terms of we're walking people through and giving them the examples and stuff. And so I think a large component of that, though, couching this is when you're in the consultation, and when I say consult, I mean the initial consult and I mean the weekly schedule consult. I'm a big proponent of regularly talking to people every week. It helps you build the relationship, which creates more stickiness. And generally speaking, you'll get a lot more information out of a face-to-face or a Zoom than you will if you were just doing a spreadsheet type situation. So, to each their own. But asking them, hey, what's your biofeedback this week? Like 1 to 10, rate your digestion. No one knows what the fuck that means. Okay, digestion was good. I ate my food and it passed through me. You're like, okay. But now knowing these signs and symptoms, you're always kind of fishing around for these different things of like, is this an issue we need to tackle? Is this something we need to put on the back burner? Is this something that we immediately need to deal with? Is this something we need to refer out and get you some partnership stuff? And so that's why it's really important that you understand the signs and symptoms of these things. And you understand that digestion, 3-phase process, anything happens in any of these phases, these are generally the decisions that you probably want to go down. Is it the most impactful thing you can do today? Because obviously if you're traveling, maybe that's going to mess up your digestion. Do you need to come up with a whole complicated protocol for that? Or do you just need to let that person get back the next week after they're done traveling and let them normalize? So just ask better questions as you're going through if you want to make the information useful. And don't overeducate people is what I would suggest. They don't really care at the end of the day. So, but yeah, anything to close us out, Steve, as we wrap up?
No, I think your job, no matter what kind of coach you are, is to understand basically, are they having any issues or not? Ask some general questions, ask some specific questions. If you have been formally educated and understand how to run with some of these things, there's a great deal of money to be made by helping people truly feel better just from eating food. So I think that's a great opportunity. If you've not done any of this stuff yet, then, stick around and we'll teach you some more about it and you'll go through some of the certifications as we put them out there, or work with one of the other companies that's great out there that you've already known or you've heard of. But no matter what, at the end of the day, I've seen a lot of companies just sell everybody everything, and I don't think that's appropriate. So make sure you're selling people what they need. That's going to be best for you, best for them, and best for everybody in the long run. So that's the closing words that I have. So if there's nothing else, though, just thank you guys for listening to Beyond the Pump today, where we break down the business of fitness and nutrition. Hopefully, got a little bit to think about there, and hopefully you're not watching this or listening to this during a meal. But otherwise, subscribe to the channel, like the episode, throw a comment down below if you want us to break down a different topic in the future, and we will see you guys next time.
Peace.